Hello and welcome once more to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and my guest today is Arjuna Ardagh. Hi Arjuna.
Hi there.
And Arjuna has been pursued by Conscious TV for a time now because I first got a book called The Translucent Revolution, How People Just Like You Are Waking Up and Changing the World. I like the title, and when I got the book, I also liked the book. It's quite a heavy, not heavy, but it's a lot of pages here, 502 pages. So
makes a good doorstop.
It's not a kind of an easy afternoon read, but there's some really interesting accounts of all the people that Arjuna has met over the years, have had waking up experiences, and also how they've integrated and handled those experiences in life. And that's one of the subjects we're really going to focus on in this interview today. He's written a few other books. I have some here. Look Before You Leap, 72 Shortcuts.
It's actually leap before you look.
You're absolutely right. Leap before you look.
Different meaning, yeah.
72 Shortcuts for Getting Out of Your Mind and Into the Moment. And one called Better Than Sex, The Ecstatic Art of Awakening Coaching, which isn't really about sex, it's about awakening coaching. And How About Now? And that's a great place to start.
Right.
How about now? How are you feeling now?
Very good. How are you?
I'm good. I think one of the things that I enjoy about Conscious TV is about really feeling the guest and just trying to start from a place of being present and being here and then seeing where the adventure goes.
I'm on board with that.
Good. So you live in America, although you were born in London, I think.
Yeah, born in Paris, but I grew up in London.
Yes. And your spiritual interest started very young, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it started actually at 14. And it was really, I think, like many people at that time, this is the early 70s, it was fueled out of unbearable suffering. When I got to be a teenager, before your teens, you have your family around you. There's you, and then there's your family, and beyond your family, there's this kind of out of focus reality called the rest of the world that you don't have so much about, but your family is what you really know. And so when you get to be a teenager, it's the first time that you can actually look at your family objectively and compare your family with other families and evaluate the hand you've been dealt. And for me, when I was able to do that at 14, I realized, that it was a very messy situation that relative to other people. There was a lot of unhappiness and conflict. There were several suicides in my family. So
really,
yeah. So
but how did that affect you? Because that is heavy stuff when you're so young.
You can imagine how it affected me. I was pretty desperate when I got into my teens, because then I actually realized, oh, there is such a thing as relative degrees of mental health, and I'm not in such good shape. And I had all these tendencies within myself towards suffering and wanting to die and everything, because these things are to some degree hereditary. Just like if you've got blue eyes or longer nose or something, it's hereditary. So mental and emotional characteristics are also hereditary. But it turned out to be a great blessing, actually, because
just to note that, it's often the case, like someone like Kurt Cobain, from Nirvana, who's very well known, he committed suicide.
Yeah. 3
of his close relatives had also committed suicide. Right. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It does kind of run somehow in the genes, or somehow it gets into the mental thinking process. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, when I got to be 14, I realized I needed to do something. Either I was going to go crazy or commit suicide, as many as my relatives had, or I needed to do something to shift my state. So this was early 70s, and I checked out psychotherapy, But I quickly realized that the psychotherapists were in worse trouble than their clients. But then I discovered the import of Eastern spirituality, because the Hare Krishnas were just getting going on Oxford Street, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Yes.
You're walking down Oxford Street. And so I actually met a Hare Krishna. I was at school in Canterbury, King's School, Canterbury, and I met a Hare Krishna sitting underneath the cathedral, right? He was sitting like just under the shadow of the cathedral outside, chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So I was mystified, you know, I was entranced by this Oriental gentleman. So I waited very patiently and went up very, very, very gently, and I said, you know, "Excuse me, sir, do you speak any English?" And he said, "Yeah, mate, come on, sit down. I'll tell you all about reincarnation." He was from the East End of London, you know. So anyway, he told me about all these things, reincarnation and Krishna and enlightenment and all these things. And something kind of clicked, you know, like, yes, you know, I got this. It was almost like a remembering of a reality beyond the personal drama, like a transcending. So I went and called my mother. I was at boarding school. I called my mother and I said, "Great news, Mum. I've met a Hare Krishna and I'm going to become a Hare Krishna." Well, of course, being my family, my mother threatened to commit suicide. That was her standard response, you know. So that wasn't going to work. So we made a compromise, and I actually learned to meditate instead. And then during my teens, I really, really went deeply into this pursuit of transcending the mind. But you have to understand, in my case, it was out of desperation. It wasn't out of any kind of genuine kind of quest for higher states. It was just like, how do I get out of this unbearable suffering? How do I actually get enough distance from my mind and these dark emotions to experience some kind of lightness around it, some space around it? That was, and I think many people of my generation, we explored spirituality really to escape suffering, to escape personal suffering.
And how was it to start meditating to start with? Did it come naturally, or did you have to really work at it?
No, it's hard. It was. I remember it was hard. It was hard just to keep my eyes closed for a few minutes at a time. At that age, was very hard. Yeah.
Yes, because you feel teenagers, they're running around doing things and pursuing girls and drinking and everything else. To sit and meditate is really bucking the trends.
Well, that's true of teenagers generally, and in my case, I think when I dropped in, I can see, looking back now, that I would start to meet unmet pain, and it was difficult to sit with that pain.
So you met unmet pain, and so what did it mean to just sit with it?
Well, I can say a lot more now than I could then.
But I mean, for someone, from what you remember, someone so young, because I am interested in this.
Yeah.
This time, because most people start meditating in their spiritual journey much later than you did.
Mm-hmm.
So for a teenager, how was it to sit with your pain from what you can remember?
Well, it was confusing and overwhelming, because pain has a tendency to want to spin the web of a story around itself. So it's actually very difficult, and I didn't know how to do it at that time, but it's very difficult to just sit with sadness without grabbing onto a story of why I'm sad. It's difficult to sit with anger without grabbing onto a story of this is why I'm angry. It took me, it was much, much later in my personal evolution that I discovered how to be present with feelings in their purity. But at that time it was a good beginning. And I had these moments, I can remember as a teenager, where there would just be these moments of just a few seconds where it was like you were in a tunnel and you suddenly just came out of the tunnel into this huge open space, and there was just this vastness, like infinite consciousness. It just lasts for a few seconds. And that was enough to keep me motivated. That kind of just tiny taste of peace, of liberation, was enough to keep me going.
And were you on your own with this, or did you have a teacher at the time?
I was part of I was involved for many years with one organization that was teaching meditation, and then after a while that seemed a little repressive, and when I got into my early 20s, I shifted to another kind of, I suppose you could say, group, or some people would say cult. You know, I found another teacher, an organization to be part of.
Yes, because just pulling out some notes from some of your books, you talked about becoming an extremist spiritual seeker.
Yeah, I was extremist, yeah.
Yes, and you were trying lots of things, lots of techniques, communal living, est, yoga, primal scream, tantra, tai chi.
All at different times, yeah.
Yes,
not all at the same time.
Yeah. Which ones did you find particularly effective?
Well, you know, relative to what came next, I would say it was all actually a case of a dog chasing its tail, you know. Because something happened 20 years later, in 1991, when I was 34 years old, that really that really caused all of that to just fade into the background. And that was when, in 1991, I still seeking, you know, still, by that point I had already started a school in Seattle. I was training psychotherapists to practice hypnotherapy. It was very successful. I made enough money to retire by the time I was in my early 30s.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I went back to India. I was set for life. I didn't have to work again. And I went back to India, still looking for this, I didn't know what, but looking for some kind of, we used to talk about enlightenment. I don't really use that word anymore, but we used to talk about enlightenment really as some kind of undefined phrase to refer to the longing. So I ended up, quite by chance, I ended up meeting a teacher in India. And it's maybe a mistake to call him a teacher because he was unlike anyone else I'd ever met. He didn't have a teaching. He was just this radiant human being. His name was H.W.L. Punja, and he's sometimes known as Papaji. And I ended up finding him. When I met him, there was only 8 people sitting in his living room. And he was an ex-army officer, so actually very impatient. he didn't tolerate fools very easily, you know. So I remember, you know, I went to his. I remember when I first walked into the room, I was late. I got a ride on a scooter from his son, which was the most terrifying experience you can imagine, going on a scooter through the crowded traffic of Lucknow. But I arrived late, and I can still remember the moment when I walked into the room and first set eyes on him. He was sitting there. He was very stern. He was sitting on a kind of a bench, just looking grumpy. Just like, He looked like a lion that was a little annoyed. And I can remember just looking at him, and it just as I recognized him, I had this feeling: this is it. I've met my end. I will not. My defenses will not survive this. He's too much He's too powerful to be able to put up any kind of a fight. You know, the kind of the egoic, contracted part thought all that. So anyway, I sat and listened to him talking, and it was quite incoherent actually, because there was a lot of traffic around and buffaloes walking by. So he was talking in a very, very expansive way about fullness is emptiness, and there's no personal. He was talking in a way that didn't give the story much to hold on to. And then he had a tea break where in the break he would go back to his room and he would chew pan, which is a kind of something wrapped in a betel leaf. It's tobacco and some other ingredients wrapped in a betel leaf. So he would chew this. And he called me back to his room to meet personally. And he was very impatient. He said, "What do you want? Huh? What do you want?" And really, like, you better come up with a good answer or you're out. And so I said to him, "I feel like I've been seeking as long as I can remember," which was true. It's 20 years. "I feel like I've been seeking as long as I can remember." And I said to him, "What is in the way of finding?" And he looked at me like this was the most stupid question anyone had ever asked him. He looked at me and he said, "What's in the way of finding? Seeking, of course." And it was in that moment, it was really like as though my whole kind of mental process was like this very elaborate machine, and somebody abruptly pulled a plug on it. Because so much of my identity was tied up with seeking to find the end of suffering. And he was saying the primary thing in the way of peace was this activity of seeking. And then we had another conversation. We went back in, we had continued with the meeting, and we had another conversation where he said, he looked at me again. He was very, very gruff, you know, and he looked at me and said, "Huh? What do you want? What do you want? Like, why are you here?" But it was in the spirit of, let's get rid of him, you know, like, "What do you want?" So I gave him the answer that I'd been trained to give. You know, it was a mechanical, conditioned answer that the trained, you know, the trained monkey had been trained to say, which is, "I want enlightenment." No one really knows what that means. It's just it's a phrase people bandy around. So I said, I want to be enlightened." He went, "Oh, what's that?" Well, that was a good question, you know, "What's that?" I said, "Well, the truth was I don't know," but then I said, "Well, I want to be free." He said, okay. Now I'd given him something he could work on. Oh, okay, free, that's easy, right? He said, okay. He said, you show me the one who is bound and I will set it free. I thought, that's a good deal. He's telling me all I've got to do is show him my ego and he will liberate it. Great. So there followed one of the most turbulent weeks of my life. The roller coaster of all roller coasters, which I spent most of the time lying prone on a hotel bed. So I went back to my hotel and I started trying to find this thing called the ego so that I could give it to him and he could liberate it. But at this point, the mind was still, the thought process was still very active, just as it had always been. But now it had no central story to it anymore. It was as though, imagine a movie, right, that has a coherence to it, and you just cut it up into tiny bits and then just show them in random order. It was like that. It was like, there was like, you know, parrots, enlightenment, relationships, sex, minestrone soup. It was just going in all different directions, you see. And I really felt like I was going completely and utterly mad. It was just the mind had no kingpin to hold it together anymore. And on the 6th night, today, the same process I'm describing takes about 10 minutes, but back then it was slower and it took about a week. So the 6th night, I remember I went to bed and I felt this urgency because I could feel like he wasn't going to give me an infinite amount of time to solve this. So I wrote him a little note about wanting to, some poetic note or something, and I folded it up. And it was about, you know, how do I find the ego or blah, blah, or set me free, or I can't remember. I wrote it, so put it down. And you know, and then I lay down to go to bed. Now, you know what happens if you have something on your mind when you go to bed at night? It's the first thing you think of when you wake up in the morning. It happened to me last night. Last night I lost my cell phone. I went to bed at night thinking, where was my cell phone? When I woke up in the morning and opened one eye, the first thing I remembered was the cell phone, because whatever you go to sleep with, you wake up with. So I went to bed that night with the thought, I have to find my ego to give it to Punjaji so I can be free. Right? I didn't really know what the ego was. It was just a word, you know, that I was holding on to. So in the morning, I didn't really sleep very well, but just kind of as I came back to normal consciousness, the first thought that came was, got to find the ego. So with the eyes still closed, it was as though a hand just reached out to find this entity that I had called me, this trapped entity. And the hand just reached out and reached out and reached out, and it reached out 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 and it reached out, and it just went on and on and on and on into empty space. And then there was just the recognition, wow, this whole story of me and my suffering and my parents and suicide, all this story is actually just dancing in empty space. But it was absolutely clear in that moment, this is not a new thing. This is not a new experience I'm having. It's always been like this. It has always been like this. But the hypnotized preoccupation with the story had distracted the attention from the obvious presence of the empty space. Just like if you look up in the sky and fixate on a little configuration in the sky. What's it called? A little, you know, what do you call that thing when you have some stars together? I forget. Anyway, little configuration in the sky.
Galaxy.
Well, something, no, smaller than that. But when you look at one of these little things, they're called, you know, the I forget what they're called, the archer and things. When you look at a little thing in the sky like that, your attention, the more you focus on one of these things, you ignore the vastness of the sky. You see, when your attention focuses. So my attention had just been focusing for 34 years on me and my story and ignored the space in which it was dancing. And then in that moment of looking for this thing and then not finding it, something happened. The body, just on its own, it went into a state of laughing. I mean, uncontrollable laughing that lasted straight for 25 minutes. It was just full belly, the whole body shaking with just incredible. It was like releasing this stress of me and my story. And I went back to see him that day, and he immediately could see that I'd got the point. And we didn't really talk much about any of that
But
stuff.
who'd got the point? That's the question.
Right. Well, the point had been gotten then.
Yeah.
It's just semantics.
Yeah.
But anyway, we didn't really talk much. I lived with him for a year after that, and we didn't really talk much again about all that stuff. If ever I did try and bring the topic up again of spiritual blah, 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 he would get annoyed and irritated and tell me to stop, mind messing around.
So did that state hold for a year?
It's not a state, you see. The realization is not a state. It's important to recognize that. A state is something that comes and goes. So happiness could be a state, or...
so you'd call it a realization?
Well, let me just explain for a minute how it was there, because a state is anything that has a beginning and an end in time. So in the same way, being happy, being sad, being tired, those are states. But realizing that you are a man who is having these feelings, that's a realization. It's a realization of the context in which everything's occurring. So what occurred in the hotel room was not a state exactly. It wasn't an altered state. It was the realization of that which was always there. So to answer your question, the realization is not reversible. You can't actually undo a realization. In the same way, if I say to you, have you seen my glasses anywhere, Ian? I put them somewhere here and I can't find my glasses. Have you seen my glasses? Ian, could you help me? Have you seen my glasses anywhere? I don't know where I put them. Can you help me out? Do you know where they are? Huh? Well, you see? Now, or even better analogy would be if I was looking through the glasses, asking you, have you seen my glasses? And then you were to say, well, you're wearing them. That would be a realization. You can't unrealize that again.
But the realization can be covered like it was before.
Yeah. So
I guess my question is, did the covering come back, or was there always enough shining through?
Well, it doesn't matter. You see, yes, the covering. I mean, every time the attention focuses on something, it's not completely in recognition of spaciousness, but it doesn't matter because there is now a recognition that the spaciousness doesn't go anywhere. You see, the way that I remember Punjaji once talking about this to somebody, and he said, when you go to if you have a home and you know where your home is and you live in your house and it's paid off, right? You don't even have a mortgage, right? You can go out of your house to Tesco and buy your groceries, but you're not going to go to a panic that now you've lost your home. You can go out and be perfectly comfortable at Tesco's looking at canned peaches and whatever you buy at Tesco, and then you know that your home's still there. So in the same way, realization doesn't require, and this I think is a very important thing, it doesn't require some kind of fixed, remaining in this vastness all the time. You can be relaxed and live your life in any way you want to. You can have sex and make money and dance and do whatever you want to do, because the realization is here that all of this activity is happening in this vastness, and real freedom is the freedom to do whatever you want, to play freely in this realm with mastery and skill, because the spaciousness doesn't go away. It can't go away.
But Arjuna, you also talk about, and the quote I pulled out one of the books, the realization was easy, living it was the challenge.
Yes,
and that's kind of what I'm trying to get
at.
Yes.
Okay, good. So the realization is easy, and maintaining realization is easy. To realize this is always here, that's easy. What I mean by living it is the challenge. I don't mean staying spacious all the time is the challenge. I mean living a life of integrity is the challenge. Let me jam on that for a minute, can I? I know you're a music man, so you can relate to jamming, yeah? So what I've noticed in myself, and I've noticed it in many of my friends who have had similar realization, there is a strong temptation to have this kind of realization of spaciousness and go, wow, this spaciousness is really nice. This is my home, so I won't do anything now. Now there is no doer, there's nothing to be done, there is no future, there's just now. So I'm just going to kind of stay in this spacious state. And there are a lot of teachers who develop a lifestyle around non-doing. which is fine if that's what you want, if that's what you consciously choose. I prefer non-doing. It's perfectly okay.
But you see, then for me, there's a decision's being made by somebody or something.
Well, it is. It's true. And the point that the reality is, whether we like it or not, that as long as there is a body, there continues to be the appearance, if you like, of somebody choosing. And if you try and deny that, your life becomes a mess. Because there is choice. You and I know the word choice, right? We can, I mean, when we're driving away from the studio today and I say, would you prefer Italian or Indian? Hopefully you're going to be able to say, I'd rather have Italian, without having to be, oh, there's nobody to choose. You know, that's nonsense. Of course, there is the spaciousness.
Yeah, but you see, Arjuna, we've had people on Conscious TV who are real experts on the brain and how thinking works, neurotransmitters, and they'll say, actually, well, before you were consciously aware of making that decision, the brain had made that decision several seconds earlier.
Yeah.
There's so many different levels and ways to look at this.
But I understand it. You know, Iain, I'm very pragmatic. You know,
Good.
my role in life is I'm a coach. I'm not a theoretician. So really, my primary motive is to help people to, I think the simplest way to say it would be to live a life of no regret. To live a life where one day you can die and know that you lived fully. And part of living a life where you've lived fully, where you've lived it, you can die at peace. Part of that, not all of it, but a part of it is knowing that you have not avoided things out of fear or avoided things because they're difficult. So
Yes.
the point I was trying to make, and I'd like to get back to it for a moment, is it is possible to use this kind of transcendental, spacious realization as a sophisticated spiritual excuse to avoid facing life, you see, to avoid facing life. And part of facing life is making choices and being responsible and making choices and having to face the consequence of the choices. So it's very convenient to say, oh, there's nobody here, there's nothing to do, because it's a great way to avoid making choices and living life with integrity, you see. So for me, when you're now coming back to what you said about living it, for me, the education that I've received in life, in living it, means being a father in such a way that my children...
Let's just go sequentially, because I want to try and have a
okay.
degree of
All right.
sequence, because
Okay.
the time will be flying by,
Sure,
and I
sure,
want
go
to
for
try
it.
and get the
Go,
best
go,
out of you,
go,
Arjuna.
okay, yeah.
So you came back from India on Punjaji's encouragement, and very much one of the things that you found when you got back was you sat with people in satsang.
You're missing a step that's really that's very significant. The reason that I was married, and the reason we left India was because my wife got pregnant.
Okay.
And when she obviously she got pregnant when I was there, but then I had to travel back to America to deal with some immigration matters, to do with getting a passport and stuff. And she found out she was pregnant while I was gone. So she was really happy about it and told everybody. And I was absolutely mortified, you see, because I was quite attached to this living in India, being spacious, and my plans did not include now having a family, which of course also means supporting a family. But, as I mentioned to you, I was retired, right? I had enough money to live. I had enough money to live for the rest of my life without ever working again if I was alone. I didn't necessarily have enough money to live to support a family, right? Particularly not if we were going to go back and live in America again. So then what did I do? I made a choice, but a very bad choice. I invested that money that I had in 5 different things, but they were a little bit risky things, with the intention of like making a lot more money so I could still not have to work. It was all motivated by avoiding life, you see. And actually, this was the great teaching for me. All 5 of those investments went bankrupt. So now I had a wife, I had a child, and no money, right? And that actually has become, what I have to offer people now is just as much fueled by that calamity as it is fueled by what happened to me with Punjaji. Because I was actually obliged, I was forced, very similar to my namesake Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, I was forced to face the world and take action, you see.
Yes.
I didn't have the option of leading this life of non-doing. I had to do stuff.
Yeah. Well, one of my favourite phrases is being man in the world, but not of the world.
Yeah.
And I think it is very much a case of that. You have the basic realization, and one of the things that you talk about in the books is that you came back. You worked with people, or you were with people that had some kind of realization. And one of the things I'd like to also for us to recognize here is these realizations, they're very common.
Yes.
And again, you talk about this in the books, that people in their own way have a realization. They might be hiking in the countryside, it might be just something is harmony in life, and that everything relaxes.
Could I just make a little distinction? Because I think there's a distinction we have to make. Dropping into more spacious states of consciousness, that is very common. That, I would say, everybody is having that. Every time you have sex, you have a little bit of that. Right?
Yes.
Realization is not quite the same thing.
Good.
Realization means the conscious recognition that this spaciousness is my true nature and it doesn't go anywhere. That's a matter of waking up and realizing, aha, whoa, actually all of this stuff is dancing in this greater spaciousness. Now, Joe Blow, round the corner here in Battersea, when he has good sex with his wife, as he climaxes, he's going to transcend his worries and forget about his life and forget about himself for a few seconds and enter into a more spacious state. That doesn't mean he's had realization. It means
that's a peak experience more, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But the realization means that's actually the conscious recognition that that is who I am. That's what breaks the trance, you see.
Okay, and that's what you had with Punjaji. You knew who you were. And so what we're saying is
and that can't go away. That is irreversible.
Right. These tastes, what we can call peak experiences or expanded experiences, they can be a gateway. Is this right? To knowing who you really are. They're clues, if you like.
Well, I think we have to really put 3 lines under the word can, because almost always they're not. Okay.
And then, and what's the reason that they're not?
Because, well, I'm not very good at why, but I'll take a stab at it. But
yeah.
I mean, back when I was growing up, back in the 60s and 70s or 70s, people were taking tons of drugs and having fantastic expanded experiences. It didn't lead to realization for almost any. I mean, I don't think it led to realization for anybody I can remember. Right? As I mentioned already, good sex leads to a more expansive state of consciousness. It almost, I mean, it's probably one in a, I don't know, millions of times would it actually lead to realization. So it's very, very rare that an expansive experience would lead to realization. Realization requires soberness, awakeness. In my case, it required somebody to point my attention in that direction, like a good teacher or a coach even will do that. So realization, realizing the true nature of things is not the same thing as having an experience, which is actually why, you know, recently there's been quite an interest in the shamanic, the South American shamanic substance ayahuasca, very popular thing.
Yes.
And it's actually, I think, somewhat illegal, but anyway, it's still popular in the underground circles. So people drink ayahuasca and go, oh wow, that was great, I had this experience. So they drink more and more and more ayahuasca. I've met people who've drunk ayahuasca like 600 times, but it doesn't appear to have led to any greater maturity or self-reflection or anything, because it's only an experience, you see. And this is a really important thing to do with being conscious. You've got conscious state. Having experiences, peak experiences, doesn't actually do anything to you except increase your level of frustration, unless it is accompanied by a greater blood flow to the front part of the brain, where you actually have the capacity to discriminate between what is real and what is not real, what is abiding and what is temporary.
Okay. And to follow your journey here, so I interrupted you when you were talking about your marriage and your wife was now pregnant. So what did that mean practically for you in terms of your day-to-day living?
Well, first of all, it meant that now I'd lost all my money, so I actually had to start to think about money, right? Which I didn't really want to do. But more important, it meant I had to, now I was going to be a father. I had another son as well. I have 2 children. So I was going to be a father and, of course, a husband. But this led to a very interesting period of my life, which I think some people can relate to, where Punjaji had empowered me, I suppose, to be a teacher. And it actually went really well. It kind of flowed on its own. So I was giving what was called satsang. I think people still use that term sometimes. I was giving these kind of meetings, and they were really popular. I mean, sometimes with more than 1,000 people in the gathering, So there's something happens to you, however enlightened or realized or whatever you think you are, when you sit with 1,000 people and you're saying these things and people are going like, and getting high on whatever you're saying, it's really easy to hypnotize yourself with your own...
Well, the ego must creep back.
I wouldn't put it exactly like that. I'm not quite sure what that would mean, but anyway, something like that happens. You get a little kind
grandiosity.
You get a little puffed up, thinking, oh, I'm really the guy, Yeah. And and then I would go home to my. Now, if you bookmark it, I can come back to why I didn't quite go along with the ego statement in a minute. We can talk about that in a second. But I went back home to my wife and children, and it was actually painful to experience, but also painful to admit to myself that all this big love and this, all this flowing cosmic, universal, blah, blah thing that was happening in these spiritual meetings was not happening at home with my wife and kids. And the immediate conclusion that it's tempting to come to is there's something wrong with my wife, you see. She's not spiritual enough. She's not on my level. So, I can fly high in these meetings, but when I actually have to deal with taking out the garbage and paying attention to her, oh, she's too needy, she's not, blah, 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 right? And I saw this happening to many of my friends as well. I saw so many spiritual teachers having a difficult time with relationship because actually they got judgmental about their partner. So that marriage actually ended, much to my dismay, because my parents had gotten divorced when I was little, and the last thing I wanted was to create that for my kids. But the marriage fell apart. Is it okay if I tell you the story now? Because it actually...
Yeah, I'm aware we have 15 minutes left.
All
That's
right.
all. I want to try and pace it.
I'll speed it up, yeah. So, and this was a great source of frustration, that I couldn't hold a marriage together. I went on teaching. I had another couple of relationships. And it actually came to a very significant point for me, which has influenced probably more than anything what I write about now. Again, it was 10 years later. I was 44 years old in 1990, in 2002. I was sitting on the deck of my house, having just finished another relationship. And I can remember sitting on the deck of the house and realizing, wow, if I die one day without having reached the peaks of enlightenment, I could really forgive myself for that. It would really be okay. But if I die one day realizing I've never truly loved, that actually would be a wasted life. That would be a failed life. And that was a really incredibly impactful moment for me, to recognize that I'd been pursuing and teaching the pursuit of this kind of spacious consciousness and the realization of this. But actually, what defined my life more was the capacity to love. And 3 weeks later, I met a woman. And we didn't become partners immediately, but I met a woman who, by coincidence, told me, we went for a walk together, we were just talking, and she said she'd come to exactly the same realization exactly 3 weeks before. So on the same day, we had both realized, oh, I've been pursuing all this kind of spiritual life, but actually, what really matters to me and authentically is love. And we then eventually got together. We've now been married for 13 years. And that, I would say, is probably the essence of what you talked about, living it, is we've been actually practicing together how to show up as love, not in an interpersonal, needy way, but how to show up as this vast, infinite space, which is also love, but in a way that the other person can really receive it and feel it. And that, I think, has been, that journey has really brought me to closing the gap on longing, you know, of really feeling like the life I live now is what I long for. There isn't any gap left. And it came down to, it came kind of full circle, I suppose, to very simple values of being able to love, having your heart open enough that you can love in a way that makes the other person's day every day, that really, that's measured more by the impact on other people than by your own evaluation of your own state.
Mm. And something you told me on the phone, which I thought was very brave that you said, was that you really like finding areas of dysfunction in yourself.
Yeah.
It's like you like, because it helps you to develop another muscle.
Yeah.
And so you're always looking for where something's not clear in yourself, or there's a sort of a dark corner somewhere.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm always looking for, that's not quite right, but when it shows up, I really enjoy it.
Like a shadow side, so to speak.
Yeah, and it
isn't
usually comes through reflection from other people. You know,
yes.
If somebody, when somebody says, "Oh, I notice, you know, I didn't feel good when you said that," I lean right into that. Oh, good, because it's actually an opportunity to breathe this realization even more fully into every area of life. I mean, that's, to me, what makes this whole thing fulfilling and real, is not so much to relax into a background state, but to fully lean forward into incarnation, to fully lean forward into giving the gift that was born to be given in such a way that is measured by other people. You see, that's the thing. I think that's the key thing, is not to be evaluating your own state of maturity, but to let other people do that for you. And the feedback you get from other people actually is the... I always say to people, never mind how enlightened you feel, what do your teenage children say, right? If you've got teenage children, they are the best measurement of how well you're doing, you see? Yeah. And I've passed through that now, but I have adult children. But in a way, I think, Ian, you know, for me, the kind of the triumph of parenting... Have you had kids yourself?
I haven't, no.
For me, the triumph of parenting, the fact that I'm now kind of best friends with my kids, you know, that means more to me than anything else possibly could. And I know that everything I went through with Punjaji and with spiritual seeking was a part of that. But the fruition of it was being able to be a father to my kids in a way that broke the chain of suffering that had been handed down from so many generations before.
I'm just looking at my notes. I remember you told me that you've written a new book, not published yet.
Yeah, Conscious Men.
Conscious Men. And what particularly intrigued me was you said you cover in the book, or you partially cover, the embodied awakening and how it's different for men and women.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about that for a few
minutes.
Well,
first of all, just to put it in context, that book is actually written by John Gray and myself. John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Right,
we co-authored the book together.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, you know, and something we don't realize, that we think we know a lot about spirituality and spiritual traditions, you know, and we got all these thousands of years old things. What we often fail to notice is that all these traditions, particularly Buddhism and actually Christianity for the most part, were actually developed by men, propagated by men, for men. So what we really know a lot about is masculine spirituality. We don't know so much about the feminine. And I've really tried to look at this in working with people in as unprejudiced a way as possible. And particularly as a little example, I often meet women who tell me they feel a bit withered up. You know, they feel a little, and they say, I don't understand why, you know, I'm not feeling better, because I meditate every day. I sit and I meditate every day, and I don't understand why, you know. And it took me a while to realize that sitting meditation is actually something that was developed for the masculine nervous system and the masculine biology, because when a man sits and centers himself, Qi Kung is the same, you see. It's like when a man sits and centers himself, he comes into stillness, it releases dopamine to the brain. Very quickly, a man has the capacity to forget his problems. It releases dopamine and serotonin, and it causes testosterone levels to replenish. So in 20 or 30 minutes, a man's testosterone level will come back, and he'll have a renewed capacity to face the world. That doesn't work the same for women, you see.
Okay, I never heard this before.
Men have on average, about 30 times more testosterone in their body than women do. Women do have testosterone as well, but women get stressed by life just the same as men do. But being stressed, but biochemically, means the release of adrenaline and cortisol. It's exactly the same for men and women. But women balance adrenaline and cortisol not through testosterone, but through oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is a hormone in the body, which is called, it's called the feel-good hormone.
Yes,
and
I'm aware of that, yeah.
Yeah, and it is actually released into the bloodstream through pleasurable relational contact, particularly for women with other women, because women know how to do that together. So there was a study done in 1999 at UCLA where they demonstrated when women go out to lunch together and just chit-chat, they don't talk about work, they just have some wine, some nice cheese, and talk about their lives, their oxytocin level doubles in an hour. Now that does not work for men. You see, if a man goes out to lunch with other men and just talks about his feelings and his life, he's going to get uncentered and confused. His estrogen will go up and his testosterone will go down. So what all of this points to is that actually it's sensible to recognize that men and women could benefit from recognizing this difference, and some of the time, not always, but some of the time, men and women can benefit from different kind of practices to come back to center, you see. Yeah. So meditation is a really good masculine practice, solitude, building muscle, you know, because that stores the testosterone. But for women, dance, flowing with feeling, sharing with other women, you know, I get myself into incredible political hot water when in seminars I say, you know, sometimes for a woman I'll say, you know, honestly, in my opinion, I'm going to get shot down for saying this, but honestly, in my opinion, a more effective spiritual practice for you than meditation would be going shopping with other women. And that's an incredibly politically incorrect thing to say, because feminists don't like that. But actually, when a woman goes shopping with other women to, like, you know, what, Harrods or something, where they have beautiful colors, beautiful smells, they've got beautiful things to eat, she's surrounded by pleasurable sensory experience, sensuous experience, she's sharing with other women, her oxytocin level goes up, her stress goes down, she feels more centered, she's more in her heart, she can make good decisions. Now that's a very politically dangerous thing to say, but I've said it now, you know, that in some cases, going shopping for 2 hours, you don't have to buy anything, just going shopping for 2 hours with other women may be a faster road to spiritual maturity than sitting silently and meditating. Boom, I said it on TV.
It's interesting because I'm a big meditator. I like to meditate for at least an hour every morning, and sometimes I have the time at night as well. And my wife, Renata, who's a very beautiful spiritual woman, she doesn't find it so easy to meditate. And she will do other things, and certainly being in the garden, being grounded in the garden is something that for her, and being with her grandchildren, that really nourishes her.
Does she like to dance?
She's not so drawn to dance as such, I don't think she is, and she likes shopping more than me, that's all I can say. We'd have to have her here, and she's not here today. But,
next time.
And it's interesting because she interviewed Linda Clare, who's an Australian meditation teacher, who is meditated a lot and declares herself enlightened, and she's certainly when I met her, she was a wonderful woman. I really liked Linda, and she'd very much gone through the Zen tradition and meditated a lot in Japan in very stringent situations with you know, the cold temples and everything in winter, really gone the male way, and it had worked for her. But I can get a feel for what you're saying, that it is more a male thing, and it certainly benefits me more than it attracts Renata.
Yeah, and I want to just come back to what I said earlier, you know, that really my job, if you like, is I'm a coach. You see, I don't define myself as a spiritual teacher. I don't claim to be enlightened. I also don't claim to be seeking for enlightenment. It's just not a word in my vocabulary. I mean, if I can die one day feeling that I was a decent human being, that I loved my wife to pieces and she felt it, and I loved my kids and I served people, that is plenty enough for me, you know. So I tend to be very, very pragmatic and not non-dogmatic. If women benefit from meditation, great. And if men benefit from dance, great. I would just like to make options, more options available, so a woman can realize if meditation is not working so well for me, I can also dance or do other things, or even just share feelings with other women, and that may be just as valid a spiritual practice as silent sitting could have been. Equally for a man, I've seen men go really deeply into this 5 rhythms thing of Gabrielle Roth, you know?
Yes.
And they get really uncentered, they stop keeping their appointments because they're going too much into the expression of feelings, you see?
Yes.
And so it's just a good idea, that's what Conscious Men is about, it's just a good idea to recognize it's not only that men have penises and flat chests and women have breasts and vaginas, there's other differences as well to do with hormones. And if you understand that, and realize that, I mean, there are such huge differences in the biochemistry of men and women, it's not surprising that they're going to need different kind of practices.
And it's this embodiment, becoming more and more in conscious TV now towards the subject of embodiment.
Yeah.
And it's obviously a personal thing, embodiment, and it's the first time you've brought up there's different ways that the sexes can approach meditation as such.
Yeah.
But that seems to me a big overlooked area that is now, there is more interest in that, there's certainly more books, there's more teachers talking about it, but for a long time no one really talks about embodiment, and we had Reggie Ray was our last guest on Conscious TV.
Right, yeah.
And again it was embodiment he was talking about, how important the body is, it's your barometer.
Well, yeah, but I think, you know, embodiment it's a broad term. And a part of it is literally being in the body, and that's good to do. But the extension of embodiment means showing up in your life, which means loving deeply. As I said, not in a way that you're impressed by, in a way that the people close to you are impressed by. Parenting with presence and diligence and care, and making a difference to the world through conscious business, so that you can actually feel that you've left a legacy of leaving the world in a better place than you left it. All of this, in my opinion, takes way more courage, way more intentionality, and way more energy than sitting silently contemplating emptiness. I mean, it's good to do that for a few minutes a day, that's wonderful. But I don't think it's very helpful to make a glorification out of non-doing. It's in my opinion, you know, of course you could say some people say the world has too much doing, we're all running around too much, we need to slow down. Yes, that's true, that there is a frenetic doing, but what the world is missing is conscious, deliberate, awake action, which is aligned with a vision and a purpose, and which can bring love and decency and honor and balance and fairness to the world. And that requires people to not only be awake in a kind of transcendental way, it also requires people to be awake and to face what in the Bhagavad Gita is called your dharma, to face your duty, your role in the world, to make a contribution, to make a difference, and to serve other people.
You're being very clear. We're going to have to finish in a couple of minutes, and I mentioned beforehand there's a poem in one of your books I really liked, so I wonder if you'd read the poem.
Oh my gosh, it's like
only
20 years old.
Poem.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
It's number 23, which is
I think we've got to, I don't know
number.
if you can see this, but you've got to see the picture on the back of the book shows you just when this when this was written. It's you know, it's got a very much younger Arjuna with a lot of hair. Okay, so this is like my son's age. Okay, embrace everything. If you try to divide life into what is spiritual and what is not, dual and non-dual, this creates a kind of cripple. A cripple who is trying to avoid the ordinariness of life. If you embrace it all, it takes more courage. But it is a fuller life you are left with. Embrace everything. Well, there was a young man with a dream back in 1997.
And it's very much what we've talked about,
that,
embrace everything.
I had no idea You're doing well, my boy. Keep going. All right. Good boy.
Okay, Arjuna, thank you very much for coming along to Conscious
Thanks,
TV.
mate. Very nice to be with you. Thank you.
And I'm going to show a couple of your books again.
Yeah, the only one people need is Better Than Sex. That's got it all. The rest are just preludes. Better Than
Although
Sex is
I
the
enjoy
book.
the Transition
Right.
Revolution, I'm going to show this one. And Better Than Sex, the Ecstatic Art of Awakening Coaching.
That's the one that it's got all the how-to, the practical path for living your realization in every aspect of your life.
Okay, and the one that you've co-written that's coming out about men is...
Conscious Men.
And when's that coming out?
In August.
In August,
Yeah,
great.
next month. Yeah.
Okay. And maybe we have you back at some point to talk about that.
Oh, that'd be
Sounds really
fun.
fascinating.
Great.
Thanks again. And thanks everybody out there for watching Conscious TV. And I hope we see you again soon.
Thank you so much.